Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Duke of Italy, favorite lo-fi, music, really cold YouTuber, because I've been losing weight here in Savannah, and it's still cold, and my heater's not working. It's really fun, but gets me in the mood for black metal, because it's November. That means it's nothing but black metal in November, and today we're covering the second of 4 batches of 15 albums in a row, and plus whenever there's an album that isn't up to my amazing standard, I'll just mention another album that I really like. And because I've been listening to a whole bunch this month. So, without further ado, let's just kind of get into it. Because, before we had 15, and I was able to effectively replace every not great album with a great album. And, maybe we'll be able to do that today. But I do have a very special batch here today that I'm actually pretty satisfied with. And so, let's just get into it. First, we have a re-listen, actually. This is Druth's Autumn Aurora. And this thing was pretty cool. If you guys don't know Druth, or it's spelled Drudkh, and I think it's pronounced Druth because DKH in Lord of the Rings is a TH, like there's Keras Galathon, but I don't think there's a K in those. So I don't know how it's actually pronounced, but this is a Ukrainian band. So, they've actually been kind of popping off a little bit. Ukrainian black metal, I think, because of the situation in the world right now, there's a little bit more spite in their sound. So, I will be mentioning their other stuff in a little bit, but Autumn Aurora is their album that everyone kind of listens to when you go for a Druth album. It's their most popular, if not second most popular, to Blood in Our Wells, which is an album I do need to listen to. But it is the quintessential atmospheric black metal album. When you want to think of forests and some fall weather and some sunshine, if you're looking for the coziest black metal album, Autumn Aurora might just be it. And this thing has like almost to a comical level of Atmo Black style riffs where it's a single note, then a single note, then a single note, and it just switches on the one and it holds for 4 measures each. Pretty slow moving stuff, but it's still very effective because it's so meditative. It's so it's kind of nostalgic in a way. It's kind of beautiful. It's certainly a sound that a lot of black metal bands don't typically go for, and it's almost like the logical conclusion to atmospheric black metal because it's so simplified, and yet it really nails it on the head. You do not come here for riffs, though. This is not a riff band, especially this album is not a riff album, but it is pretty effective in what it does. If you accept this album cover and these sort of vibes, the album cover, it's on Spotify, not really the one that's the other one that's all kind of grainy and weird, but you get this kind of crispy sound. It's a little bit raw, which it kind of helps the brightness of these textures, and it's actually rather cool like that. My favorite track here is actually the final track here, which incorporates extra sort of pagan-y elements to make it this really cool folky sound. It kind of reminds me of that Parannoul side project that had an album up this year, of course, but it is a black metal take on that. That last track is called The First Snow, and it really does feel like the first snow. But yeah, this thing's great. It's awesome. And up next, coming in with a bomb, Lurker of Chalice, self-titled. So this is not Leviathan, but it is a Rest solo project, Rest being Jeff Whitehead of Leviathan. We already talked about Tentacles of Horror, and here is his sole full-length from his other metal project that is his own, Lurker of Chalice, which is a bit like Leviathan in that the atmosphere is key, but it is a little bit different as it does have some funeral doom elements, but those elements do not come in until a few tracks in. And this is one of the most lethargic and depressing albums I've heard in a long, long time. It literally sounds like a spirit is trying to pull your spirit out of your own body for a lot of this. It's got this really cool effect where it'll have slowed vocals, like they'll be slowed down to reach the pitch of the more low-tuned funeral doom sections that happen almost like halfway through the album. After a couple tracks, they start showing up more and more. There are tons of dark ambient sections here, and they're all super satisfying. But the doomier tracks here are where it's at. This is a very depressing album, absolutely crushing an atmosphere. The riffs are slow-paced, but at some points, you do get your more normal Leviathan-style riffing here, but it is a little bit different from the typical Leviathan sound, but it's Jeff Whitehead. It's a very, very, very solid album. It is probably top 3 on this chart so far. This is an easy great. And up next, we have a war metal album with Archgoat's Whore of Bethlehem. I don't really curse much on this channel. I've done it a couple times, but I try to be as sparing as possible. But that is the title of this album. And here's the thing about Archgoat. Archgoat is kind of like a good entry-level war metal band. You know, it's not really reaching that post-2010s war grind or war noise type of deviation that war metal has gone to, and it's not the incredibly lo-fi stuff that maybe a Blasphemy would have for you, and it's not really as much a Blasphemy worship band because it is a war metal band that, while it is war metal most of the time, it does have a little dark ambient sections, it does bide its time a little bit, has a little bit of doomy elements every once in a while, and it's the quintessential war metal band, especially in this day and age. And what's kind of interesting about them is that they started in the early 90s, about the same time as Blasphemy. And then after like a few years, they just kind of didn't do anything for a decade. And then they came back in like 2005 and they just started uploading albums. And one of them was this. And this album, if you were to compare Blood Upon the Altar to Fallen Angel of Doom, the Blasphemy records, you could take all of Archgoat's demos and that would be their Blood Upon the Altar, and their Fallen Angel of Doom would be Whore of Bethlehem, because you take a lot of the tracks from the demos and you kind of rearrange them a little bit. And then you put it in this album here and it's rad. Without being Blasphemy or Beherit or Conqueror, this is probably about as classic as war metal can get. Maybe as classic as those, honestly. Because in terms of full lengths, you know, you only got like a couple other war metal full lengths that really, truly matter and rise above the rest. War metal is really a genre I need to discuss more of and really dive into, because I feel like it's not that hard to dive into. Of course, a lot of it's going to be redundant until you get into the war grind and war noise styles here, or bands like Tetragrammaton or Nelt Rote, or any of those really weird grindcore type bands. But that's kind of why I say Archgoat is a little easier to get into. You've got a more approachable vocal style that is deep and crushing and hateful, and the riffs are excellent as well. There's a fantastic tightness to this performance here. It's not as raw as something like Blasphemy, so you really can hear everything that's going on here. But it's not like too clear where it sounds like fake or plasticky. There's a tiny bit of reverb on the vocals, which is just perfect enough to make them kind of just edge around the instrumental section. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, Lord of the Void has the Freezing Moon riff, but I mean, it's a good riff, I can't lie. But it does have this more brutal caveman riff style war metal like bit that goes in between the riff, I guess you could say. But that is another thing about war metal, and especially Archgoat, is that the caveman riffs are always effective and they're always fun. But Archgoat does know how to space them out between more melodic sections. And don't go thinking that it's like Sacramentum or Windir or Dissection or any of those mellow bands. I'm really just talking about normal black metal and that level of melodicism, rather than the grindcore approach that war metal typically goes for. And I'd say this is the most atmospheric war metal band you could find, if you want to call them atmospheric. But they're heavy, they're evil, they're dark, they're riffy, they're fun, they're Archgoat. So it's great. And Archgoat honestly is a band that you can't really miss with. Out of the 3 albums of theirs I've heard, I've really loved them all. And we got another banger coming up with Xasthurs to Violate the Oblivious. This is the one with Screaming at Forgotten Tears. Is it my favorite Xasthur album? I think I like Subliminal Genocide a little bit more, but this thing is still really cool. It's one of many classic Malefic records that he's a part of. It does kind of miss the Subliminal Genocide sort of drunk sounding acoustic riffing that I really like, but the atmosphere is key here, and it's something that's expanded upon really well from previous outings. It's got these really crunchy and angular chords that Xasthur's kind of known for, and it's got this really gritty tone to the whole thing. It's got this nice sort of necrotic production. Scott, or Malefic, straight up has some of the best black metal vocals of all time. I think he's got this really nice sound, and it's a bit varied between releases, honestly. It's higher pitched, and it's this sort of like ghostly wail. And if you can't handle bands like Silencer, you know, Scott's vocals are a little more approachable. And the melodies are extra. Every time you think it gets too comfortable, it just adds a little bit extra to the sound. This is one of those albums that I think a good stereo cut with some loud volume is really the ideal way to do it. Spotify doesn't do it any favors here, so this is something honestly I'd recommend on vinyl or CD and listen to in the car or on a good stereo player. I do recommend it though. It is a fantastic DSBM album, and Xasthur is really one of those bands that for 2/3 of the discography you can't go wrong at all with, so this is great. And up next we have Isengard with Hostmork. I've mentioned Isengard on the Crusade from the North split. This is Fenriz's own band. And as much as I didn't like the song, which is actually the first song on this album, on the Crusade from the North split, I think here it's produced a little more appealingly. And this whole album, honestly, It's not just pagan LARP, it's actually kind of fun. If you like blackened sort of Viking metal stuff, you're gonna probably like this. But it does try to be a bit like folky and dancey, which is something I never really liked that much. If you're gonna go for like a danceable vibe, I'd rather you just throw in like a death metal influence or a grindcore influence where I just want to punch people. But I really don't want to do like the let's link arms and dance around a burning bush or whatever pagans do anymore. There are a lot of clean vocals on this album. Most of these songs have clean vocals, and his singing is honestly not terrible in the realm of Viking metal. I have seen worse, and I'll be mentioning it for sure. One of the nicest things about this is that in terms of production, the bass tone is super fat, and it sounds actually pretty rad, and it gives it this momentum that really helps it. Fenris's harsh vocals, when they show up, are phenomenal. You know, he's one of the cornerstones of black metal. You can't help but just love what he does because he sounds great. I think the last track is kind of whatever, but this album has more hits than misses. The song Thornspawn Chalice easily competes with any Darkthrone track, as it is a phenomenal sort of second wave black metal track that Fenris carries entirely, and it sounds amazing. Well, of course, he carries it. He's the only one doing it. But this album, I'm not going to say it's a hidden gem or anything, but it's a cool thing that I think is definitely more than just its gimmick. I think it's actually a decent little outing, and I think it beats the Storm material. So if you're looking for Fenris doing Viking metal, check out Hostmork, definitely over Storm. But this is, I give it good. But if you're going for the LARP territory, I think another album that you should check out instead is the new Druth. I mentioned Autumn Aurora, but their newest album is really spiteful atmospheric black metal with some of the most interesting playing I've heard Druth come up with, or any Ukrainian black metal band. Truly something that's pretty impressive. If you take the aggression of Hate Forest and add it to Druth's atmospheric sound, and you give it almost like a post-metal edge at a couple points, I think you get something really special. And up next we have a recent release with Ultha, All That Has Never Been True. This album exploded way back earlier this year, and I was going to listen to it, and then I was like, wait, I'll put it on my Nothing But Black Metal November for this year because everyone's talking about it. And I did the same thing last year for Lamp of Murmur. I could have done it for Pale Swordsman. Thank God that I didn't, but I did it for Lamp of Murmur, and I'm upset that I did it with that because Submission and Slavery was actually rather disappointing. It might not have been Submission and Slavery. It was the new album that I can't remember its name. And this album right here, I'm not going to say is bad, but it's certainly disappointing. It's post-metal, atmospheric black metal. It's okay. The atmospheric black metal parts are so generic, and that's kind of the big downfall of this album, is that it really doesn't branch out enough. I think the meditative post-metal sections are actually the best part here, but it's that the atmo black stuff doesn't keep the atmosphere like it should, and the production really does weigh it down a bit. It's just the guitar tone is not great. The whole mix doesn't sound great either. The song Halos in Reverse is a phenomenal song. I think the songwriting is something that is very strong here, and it's something that I like quite a bit. So yeah, I think this album's good. But if you're looking for a new album, and I don't know if I would put this one on my chart myself, but the new Elende album is actually a blackened post-metal album. It's a little more on the black gaze side, just barely with the way that it's written, but I think the melodies are normally pretty strong. It's got some cool acoustic bits, and it's certainly better than Ultha's album. It's more engaging, for sure, and also got the album cover of like a boar or something, so that's kind of fun. And up next, we have Nocturnal Mortem with Weltanschauung. This is an NSBM album, so, you know, don't buy it, even though the themes are like largely pagan, but this thing is a 70-minute mammoth of black metal and folk LARP. Cringe. But does that mean it's all bad? No, actually. I think the metal sections are kind of incredible. The black metal melodies here are really inventive. The riffs are all super cool. It's that when it throws in the jaw harp sections that I'm really thrown out of the mix, or the flute that sounds utterly shrill and terrible. I don't know what they were thinking on this album. It's like a weird mix between some of the best black metal and a lot of really, really disappointing folk sections. Also, the production does let it down a little bit. It's just kind of muddied up, but it doesn't have like the raw appeal that a lot of raw black metal tends to have. This is certainly one of the weirdest black metal albums I've ever heard without trying to be quirky. It's just LARPing. But there's also some clean vocals, which they're a bit mixed, but I can still remember the melody of the final track here, even though there's like an extra 2 tracks of like ambience that really are just an extension on the last track. This does have kind of a percussive heavy metal quality, adds some syncopation to the melodies that makes it a lot more engaging, actually. But I think over 75 minutes, it doesn't do enough. If you cut out all the folk bits and cut this down to maybe a 60-minute album, it'd still be pretty long, but might be a little bit better. But I do give this a good. But if you're going for something atmospheric, kind of pagan LARPy, I don't know, Hivisoseta Os by Burzum. You know, that's the other CD of Burzum that I have, and it's better than this, so check that one out instead. But I will say Nocturnal Mortem's album here is certainly interesting. It's gimmicky, but it's interesting. And up next we have Enslaved's Frost. This is an album a lot of people consider to be classic, so I decided to check it out. It is Viking metal. I believe it's the second Enslaved album, and Enslaved actually had one of my top contenders for album of the year in 2020 with Utgard, which was a really cool progressive mix album here with a lot of really good influences, and it had a lot of really good melodies, and none of the songs were going too crazy. ISA is like an Enslaved album also that I think is really strong. I love all the guitar melodies. I think it's a very solid album. I checked that one out last year. And now we got Frost, which I was expecting a more stripped back black metal approach, but instead you get something that's just kind of LARPing and at points cringe. You know, you get some clean vocals that are really not good. The singing on this album is rough. I thought Fenris's singing wasn't that good, and then I listened to this and I thought it was much, much worse. So I had to kind of give Fenris some kudos for being a Norwegian black metal person who could actually sing a little bit. And that's not saying much at all. In fact, I'm being very generous to Fenris. It's just that the guys in Enslaved couldn't sing at the time. I think now they can sing. In the year of our Lord 2022, they can sing a little bit. It's still like pagan Viking LARP, but you know, I'll take that over the Viking LARP that was here. But this is a production L. Huge L. In black metal, a lot of times the toms are sounding like Phil Collins toms, where they're given so much extra heft and weight. But there's so many tom fills on this album, and they all sound utterly terrible. No problem with the drummer. You know, you want some tom fills to like add some variety to your songwriting or whatever. But like, gosh, don't make them sound like this. They sound terrible. The guitar tone is weak too. Does not sound good. I do think the second half of this album is much better. I think it's got something going for it, and also the riffs are a bit lacking up until this second half. So I give this thing an okay. You know, I kind of hate to bat down a classic, if you will, but, you know, when it happens, and this thing just wasn't up to snuff. But, you know, this year in 2022, I was listening to some other stuff, and if you want a different album that has no relation to this one, but I'm just going to replace it anyways, Tra's Vat Galenva. Tra is probably my favorite black metal band of this year. Minima's up there as well as Stangarigel, I believe. They're kind of a Satyricon ripoff, but they still sound pretty good. Tra did Vat Galenva, and it's like a comfy synth blend of weird circusy black metal all about fairies and stuff, and a lot of times it's dark and a lot of times it's not. And this album's super long. It's like 80 minutes, but it's still pretty solid, and the vocals are good. Everything here is good. It's not the best Tra album, but I did listen to it this month, so it's still great because it's Tra. So ignore Enslaved, at least for the time being. I'll probably find a better album at some point. And up next, we get Imperial Triumphant's Abyssal Gods. This is sort of a Blackened Death album, and Imperial Triumphant is known for adding a lot of jazz influences, sort of this dark jazz vibe, and using all this dissonance to make something truly hellish sounding. And I think after this album, they've deviated from the black metal sound a bit more, but here they do keep this dark ambient stuff, and it does stay pretty blackened. The jazz elements do feel like they're added in a little bit more like an experimentation than something that is so interwoven so effectively. But I do think this album's actually really, really solid. It's actually one of the better albums I've heard this year, and I would almost put it up with the last two Imperial Triumphant albums, Spirit of Ecstasy and the Metropolis, whatever the heck. But this one's kind of rad. It's super dissonant black metal, as they're known for, and it's got some death metal influence, but it's not so much to distract from the intricate hazy melodicism that black metal is known for. It is a less abrasive album than the last two Imperial Triumphant records, but I think it actually helps to not distract from the melodicism a little bit more. So it does stand out in its own way. And there are also some banger ambient portions, and it's a really nice break from the breakneck pace of the rest of this album. And the riffs go crazy. They could literally repeat for 6+ minutes and still be engaging because they're just that good. This album's great, I'm happy to say. I'm a big Imperial Triumphant fan, and I doubt that's going to change anytime soon. And speaking of bangers, up next we have Anal Nathrax Codex Necro, blackened industrial grindcore. Banger after banger after banger. I listened to this one when I was working out. Zero regrets. That thing made me feel like a machine. I was punching the air. I was doing a lot of terrible, terrible things to my walls. It was a great time. But this album's a great time. This thing is dark. It's heavy. It's riffy. It's got really, really excellent blends of grindcore and black metal. You have the more grinding sections that are pretty warlike. But the production here is not as crunched up as war metal, so you do get a bit more of an expansive sound, but it doesn't really let off the aggression at all. It's still very aggressive. The vocals are so wild and energetic. They're just killer. And this is actually a pretty accessible album here. I think if you want to get into black metal, you want to transfer from like death metal or something like that, Codex Necro could be a good way to do it. The track submission is for the week is Riff City. Nothing but a banger there. The track Paradigm Shift is really where the industrial stuff comes into the fray here, but it's not like the sickening death industrial or even like the scary industrial of the 80s. It's a bit more post-industrial feeling, but it still blends super well and it doesn't pull away from the atmosphere. That sounds bad, I swear. It's not like KMFDM or any other post-industrial group. It's still heavy, but there are literally more highlights than I can even count on this thing. This is something I'm probably going to try and buy a copy of, but it's great, you know, just a phenomenal album. And next we have a re-listen with Miss Thurming's Algliemi, and this is a band that is known for 2 albums right now because they have 2 out, and some people swear by Algliemi, and some people swear by the previous album. I've not heard the previous album. I know I have to because it's a bit more raw apparently, but this one here is a sort of melodic black metal thing that tries to be very aggressive, but you know, it actually feels like Woods of Desolation, straight up. It feels almost Black Gaze-esque. But I do like the vocals a lot because even though they're not in English, and I can't understand a thing they're saying, which I don't know why I'm even bringing this up, they have this really hoarse yelling quality to them, which is something that's kind of unique. Don't think it's like thrash metal. It's like he's just yelling at the top of his lungs. And that gives me hope because when in my own band, I'm just yelling as loud as I possibly can. It's a pretty cool design here. And I think the track variety here is something that's really nice about this album because everything does sound different, but the production is pretty clean. Cleaner vocals, cleaner guitars. The tones aren't exactly my favorite, but some tracks are very creative. It's really an album trying to showcase the songwriting of the band rather than the effectiveness of the songs in this context. And I'm sure in a live setting, this would be a really incredible thing here because this super clean sound would be dirtied up a little bit in a live setting, which therefore would make it better. But to me, it's overproduced. The production is a bit flat, but because of that, it's actually a really good introduction to black metal. If you want to get in from a melodic side, if you're into like progressive metal or some other wankery, then, you know, listen to this. But right now, I think it's good. It's just not amazing like some people say it is. But you know, it is amazing. Forest A Blaze Above the Ashes. Banger. Yeah, this one's NSBM. I own a copy of it, but I bought it from a private seller before I even knew what it was, which is really fun. But it's one of my most listened to albums because it's so meditative and it's so thick and it's so hazy, but it has this really cool triumphant sound to the vocals here. It's almost like you're trying to persevere as like a ghost after like your city's burned to the ground or something. It's also got some dark folk elements that are just gorgeous. And you know, if you want to be a fan of this band, something interesting is that the reason you listen to Forest are the riffs. The riffs are, they'll repeat a lot. It'll have 2 riffs per song, potentially, or even like a huge, weird, sweeping intro section until it turns into 1 riff, or even the dark folk section, which will be 2 repetitive, clean guitar riffs. But the guitarist of this band, he left because he didn't want to be associated with the ideology of the band, even though he had his own solo project that apparently did have the NS influence there. I don't know what that was about, but he left the band, and he's really the heart and soul. Like, no one cares about the drummer, really. The vocals are great. They truly are great. But I do think the guitar is the best element. Not to, like, get on a high horse or anything, but, you know, it gives me some comfort. But that aside, you know, next album is another Forest album as a song in the Harvest of Grief. If you like Blaze Above the Ashes, you're going to like this one. It's kind of similar in texture. It's kind of similar in sound. It's still got crazy good riffs. It's still crazy cold. There's, again, no bass, very raw sound. The riffs are potentially even more hypnotic than A Blaze Above the Ashes. But what's kind of cool is that there are a lot more songs here, and none of them go into the dark folk territory. So you've got more like 7 songs here that are all just straightforward, black metal haze, and it's kind of cool. But you're probably wondering yourself, like, Duke, why listen to this over A Blaze Above the Ashes? Believe me, the quality is here. It is still amazing. But the differing factor is actually the vocals. Rather than going for that yelling, triumphant sound that was before, that had this sort of like hoarseness to the voice. That probably sounds like I'm still referring to Miss Thurming, but I am referring to Forrest here. It does have like a hoarse nature to the vocals here. They're kind of like a cackle. But on this album, they're almost like more DSBM. They are very depressing, more wretched sounding. And there's an air of desperation here. It's more like you're dying. It's like an album that would precede A Blaze of the Ashes. It's like it has like a narrative structure like that. It's very cold and it's very sad, and it's got riffs for days. So this is another great album. And up next we have Owl Crusher's self-titled album. This is Blackened Sludge, except it's not. I have to disqualify this one, but for some reason on Encyclopedia Metallum, it's labeled as Blackened Doom / Sludge. It's just sludge metal. No need to add all this other stuff. But it's slow as hell, it's sludgy, it's rad. It's got 3 songs that are above, they're like 10 minutes in length each. Some a little bit more, some a little bit less. It's great to work out to. This thing is heavy, it's pumping, it's grinding, it's grimy, it's occult, it's weird, it's dark. It's great. I just have to disqualify it. And I'm running out of auxiliary albums to replace these with. So, next part, I'll give you another couple to replace these not great, not black metal albums. Or not great or not black metal albums. Because Owl Crusher is great. I do believe it's awesome. It's just not black metal at all. But what is black metal is Craft. F the Universe. Very hateful, spiteful black metal. With some really creative songwriting. It is a pretty classic black metal sound, not that raw, but it's got kind of a crunchy sweet spot, utterly hateful, and it's got good speed dynamics, and there are parts of this album that are some of my favorite black metal songs, but not all of them. Some of them just don't match up. There are these thick bogs of barred chords that are so sludgy and gross that really help you feel like the hate behind this album. It's uncompromisingly ugly, it just doesn't have the momentum for 51 minutes. Probably my favorite track here is Thorns in the Planet's Side, which is, it has like this breakdown part where the little riffing bits are so dissonant and ugly and disgusting. You really feel the tone of this album right there. Maybe I'll check out some other Craft albums and find one that I might think is more consistent and better. But for 51 minutes, I don't think it's perfect. I think if this was like a 30-minute album, it'd probably be pretty great. But here, I think it's good, but it just doesn't quite hit the mark for me. And last one for the part, this is number 30, album number 30. We're halfway through the month. I've got one that's pretty exciting for you guys. This is Sun with Black One. Now, before you go in my comments and be like, Duke, disqualify this one. It's not cult, it's not real, it's not black metal. Guess what? It's my list. I don't care. And I love this album. This is the band Sun, the famous drone metal people. Is this blackened drone metal? Sort of. It's not like the thick tone of drone metal added to black metal songwriting. It's more like black metal songwriting woven into drone metal, if that makes any sense. And it is the black ambient stuff of black metal. This album is a lot more of a love letter to black metal than it is straight up black metal, but I think that's enough to consider it, well, black metal. Not to mention the first song is called Sin Nana, meaning the guy from Streborg. Rest has a feature here, and Malefic is featured several times, as well as with his own guitar part. This thing is way more droney and desolate than Monoliths and Dimensions. While Monoliths and Dimension has a variety of emotions, particularly for an extreme metal album, this one here is nothing but cruelty, callousness, coldness. It's a fine selection of your favorite black metal emotions, and they're all so just crushing and dense. Some songs you get some really interesting soundscapes, and on other songs you get riffs that manage to withstand for 10 minutes. While Sun does have that one song, Hunting and Gathering, Cydonia, off of Monoliths and Dimensions, that does have a pretty iconic riff in terms of drone metal. Here you've got a sort of match with that with Orthodox Caveman. While Hunting and Gathering, it does have horn parts and other parts that intercut with the whole thing, like spoken word from the ever-famous Attila. Meanwhile, in Orthodox Caveman, you don't need any of that. You stick to nothing but the riff, and it just whines, and it just grinds your bones apart. And there's some really interesting songwriting here. I think it's Orthodox Caveman, where there's the guitar riff, and then it's repeated by the bass, and it's basically just like a textural difference, but it's so interesting sounding, and it's so good. I thought it was amazing as I listened to it, but I didn't listen to it at the volume Sun would recommend, so I'm gonna have to re-listen to it at some point. But the last song on this album here, forget what it's called, but Malefic. He's locked in a box to record vocals, and most people don't know this about Malefic, but he's claustrophobic. So they use his claustrophobia to get scarier vocals, and the song is horrifying. You know, it's great, just wonderful. This album's wonderful, just a nice little treat. It's only a little horrifying, and by a little, I mean listen to it right now. Another top contender, and another great 15 albums. I'd say this is probably turning out to be the best Nothing But Black Metal November ever. Maybe because I keep replacing albums, but you can't prove anything. But that's about it. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys are liking these albums. I would appreciate it. Like and subscribe. Comments, questions, and concerns down below to what do you want me to listen to? What do you want me to review? Do you like what's going on here? Maybe I could do a quickie of an album that you like. Maybe not. Maybe it's a bad album. Who cares? But yeah, social media is down below if you like to follow my other stuff and my other exploits. And that is about it. Hope you guys are doing well out there. Have a good day. Bye.